AskReddit by forthright pedant. What is a historical fact about your family that you think is kinda neat? Great-grandpa created the Flintstones. Dan Gordon drew lots of Hanna-Barbera cartoons. Directed the first 3 animated Superman films at the beginning of WW2 as well as several seasons of Popeye, Scooby-Doo, Smurfs, Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound. Edit. Oh, and the suspense author Mary Higgins Clark is my great-aunt. Passed away a few years ago. That's so cool. You come from very creative genes. My dad loves the Flintstones. My grandfather disliked America and wanted to return to Ireland. He booked passage on Titanic's return voyage. If it wouldn't have sunk, none of us would be here. On second thought, let's not go to Ireland. Oscar Wilde is my great-great-great-uncle. That's wild. The land my dad was raised on and my cousins still live on was deeded to the family by George Washington as compensation for service during the Revolution. There was a document with his signature on it at the courthouse until a fire destroyed the records a few decades ago. AWW, that sucks, it was lost. My husband's grandfather was one of the forgotten soldiers in Canada. He was a Canadian-born Chinese man who asked the Canadian government to fight for his right to vote and a passport. Even though he was born in Canada in the 20s, since he was Chinese, he was not considered Canadian. He was dropped into the Burma jungle and was told he would likely never return. He was in the 10% that did return. He was given the right to vote, to a passport and to university. His wife is still alive today and my son is named after him. What a badass grandpa. Very cool story. My second cousin is David Scott, who walked on the moon and drove the moon buggy. Do you know him? My great-grandmother had 13 kids, so she was pregnant for literally a decade. There's 200 of us now, all because of this one woman. My mother is 90 and was the youngest and now is the only surviving member of a family of 19 kids. My great-grandfather was offered a chance to invest in a new invention by a guy by the name of Alexander Graham Bell. He declined, saying at most there would be 1 telephone per town. That sucks. Great-great-great-grandfather on my mom's side was working his field in the part of Virginia that split off and became a new state because they didn't want to secede from the Union. Union soldiers came along looking for conscripts and he was a young, able-bodied man, so they told him to come with them. He informed them he was a Quaker and thus a pacifist. According to family law, that discussion went on for a bit but he would not give in. So they shot him and left him there. Good thing he had a couple kids well before that day. Wow. That's super interesting. Deleted. This is wild. The connection and also that you were able to find that out. My grandfather invented bread, the first ever pink carnation. In a white sport coat? I have a relative who worked for the Underground Railroad and had a price on her head in the South. My uncle was a carpenter and was doing restoration work on old houses in Yellow Springs, Ohio. Many of those old, historical homes had Underground Railroad passageways and hidden walls. He got to see and restore many of them. He had photos of some of the work he was doing and I got to see those as a kid. Living in southern Ohio, we have a lot of rich Underground Railroad history here. My great-uncle Lyle delivered Bill Clinton. Who was he addressed to? Thank you. I'll be here all week. Try the veal. My grandfather started working when he was 7 years old and by the time he was 12 he had saved enough money to buy passage to the US. My great-grandfather was the town police chief in the 1920s. His brother was the mayor. Their cousins ran the casino. My family was a smaller version of Boardwalk Empire. Edit. Forgot to mention this was all in a Jersey Shore town too. Where I live, for a long time, our sheriff was also the bail bond guy. My second great grandfather spent a couple years in prison for violations of the Comstock Act. Anthony Comstock testified at the trial and said it was the largest, most obscene collection of pornography he had ever seen. Oh wow. I wonder what kinda old Timmy porn it was. I'm related to the girls that accuse the people of being witches in Salem. And also to Aaron Burr. Those girls helped to hang George Burroughs, my great to the X times grandfather. Great-great-grandfather was an eccentric inventor. He invented his own version of mass-producible car shortly before Henry Ford's Model T started being manufactured. We have a newspaper clipping about it. He met with Henry Ford to discuss going into business together. It even has an old photo of the two of them together. He declined Ford's offer and my family remained poor lol. But the patents, prototypes, etc. are all very cool to look at. A local museum even has one of his old cars in it, and they have let our family do a private viewing of his stuff in the past. What was the name of the car? I'm related to James Garfield. I think that's neat. Heh, that guy hates Mondays. I live in one of the 13 original colonies. And can trace my mom's side back to when our ancestors left England and came to the US. We still live in the area where they originally settled. Meaning my ancestors landed here in the 1600s and we never left. Mine arrived en masse on the Mayflower, and then eventually a few hundred years later, one of them walked to where I grew up. Let's just say a long walk. My family didn't budge for like 200 years. I'm still here. But my dad and I both went to college in Massachusetts, so go figure, haha. We've managed to trace all the way back to about the 1500s with both sides of my family. I have autism, as do my siblings, parents, and the majority of the extended bio family. It's so interesting because of the stories we've been able to dig up. I could possibly see signs of the autism going way back. Samuel Morse, brilliant inventor, could have easily been autistic. Way great granny, first woman found not guilty in the Salem witch trials. Turns out the witchy stuff was pranks her grandson played. She was still excommunicated from town. Oh, and who knows what was up with Lizzie Borden, but her mom and my extra great gramps were siblings and something happened there. Then great great granny was institutionalized, although I don't know why. So since my ancestors are well documented, I think it would be so interesting to see if we could track something like that. Way we were always a little different. Are there signs of autism way back then? I love that you just dropped Lizzie Borden in the middle there. My great etc. grandfather was a colonial infantryman in the battle at Breed's Hill, which later became known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. And I was about to post that I'm related to the breeds that the hill was named for. Small world. I grew up thinking the heritage on my father's side was Quebecois French. Dad grew up in Quebec. Someone started poking around at cemeteries and in church records and found out my great-grandfather was an Irish orphan who fled to Quebec in the Irish famine, and my great-grandmother was Algonquin. A lot of Irish French. There's a Canadian Heritage Moment TV commercial about it. Google. My fourth great-grandmother was a Quaker missionary who spent her life going up and down the eastern seaboard preaching against the evils of slavery. My great-grandfather, in the old country, was suspected to have been killed by bandits. He went out one day to travel and only his horse came back a few days later. I wonder how often that happened back in the day. Also, and rather horribly, I wonder if, back then, that was a trope, like going for smokes is a trope today for men who up and leave their families.